All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. We're still admitting folks. There's lots of folks still joining, but we will go ahead and get started. I've never used closed captions before, so this is an interesting experience for me. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am Allison Carlman, the Director of Evidence and Learning at GlobalGiving, and I'm so thankful that you are joining us from whatever time of day or night it is for you. I realize it is very late for some of you, and I'm so grateful that you are giving us your time. I'm really excited to share this research with you too. So here we go. Just a few reminders before we get started, because this is actually a meeting and not a webinar according to Zoom. That means you can all unmute yourself when you want to speak, but please keep yourself on mute until that point. And if you have questions, please add them in the chat. We have Ellie here from GlobalGiving who will be monitoring the chat and will be highlighting some questions during a question session. If you have any issues with audio or whatever, first try leaving and rejoining. You can also send chats to the folks who, what is the word in there, Miranda? It would say hosts or something in the chat, but you can talk to Miranda and she'll help you, or Jessica. Great, here we go. So here's how we're going to spend our time today. I will do some really brief introductions so we can get to the heart of this research that we're so excited to share with the Global Fund for Community Foundations. Jenny and Dana from Global Fund for Community Foundations will be sharing their research along with the research partners all around the world who helped us with this research. And then we will have just 10 minutes for high-level questions for the researchers, and then we're going to break out into discussion rooms to hear from you, our GlobalGiving partners, what this means to you and what you want GlobalGiving to do with this research as a next step. And then we will come back together and share some of our high-level findings. This is the team I'm so excited to introduce you to. These are the researchers who conducted this research with us. So Dana and Mary were the leads, and they wrote the report that you will get, but they also worked with these fabulous partners in 6 different countries, and so you're going to get to hear from them today. Some of them are here in person that can unmute and speak themselves, and some are not able to join, so we've added one video clip and a few quotes to make sure that their voices are represented as well. Okay, so I'll get started here with explaining what was the goal of this research that we're presenting today. GlobalGiving, as a funder, wanted to be able to easily identify, support, and strengthen community-led approaches. Our mission is to transform aid and philanthropy to accelerate community-led change, and we wanted to understand what community-led looks like according to community members themselves. It's a term that you've probably used a lot, that's been used a lot everywhere, and we wanted to hear, what do community members and community leaders believe that it means? So here were the questions. We started this about at the very beginning of the year, right before COVID really hit everywhere. And the questions were around, what does community-led look like in practice? How can it be evidenced? Can we measure it? Are there tools with which we could measure community-ledness? Do communities experience a connection between community-led organizations and impact? And then we wanted to know, what is the role of funders in either helping or inhibiting nonprofits' ability to be community-led? So here we go with the research approach, and I'm going to introduce Dana, who was in charge of the research, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the research approach, and then she and Jenny will get into some of the findings.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what approach we took, and we decided to use a participatory action research given the nature of what we were studying and how important that would be. The field partners that we worked with from these 6 countries, the criteria for choosing them was really about finding people who were committed to the principles and engaged in practices of shifting power from top-down institutions to local communities and groups. We also chose them to try and find geographic, thematic, and community diversity, and also finding people who were based in the country where they would conduct the research. But in particular, we were really seeking out to work with communities that are marginalized and typically excluded from mainstream development discourse and decision-making. So that was important to us. Each of these field partners that we worked with themselves reached out to 8 to 13 community leaders. And this was defined as people who are community members themselves, but also engaging in providing either services, solutions, and/or advocacy for other members of their community. So in total, we worked with about 67 local leaders who contributed to this research. It was voluntary, but we did compensate everybody involved for their time. And we designed this to be a process of discovery and co-creation. So it was a very iterative process. We co-designed the instruments that we used to do the research and the approach. We also, in each country, had partners customize the instruments and approach to meet their needs. And with the analysis and the tool development, it was very much a back and forth process between the Global Fund for Community Foundation team, myself, Mary, and Jenny, with our field partners to the community leaders, and right back in the opposite direction. And as Allison mentioned, we were dealing with COVID lockdowns and restrictions, but somehow we managed to pursue this research nevertheless. And we had an opportunity to also do some validation by getting some additional feedback and testing from peers and experienced individuals that were outside of our field partners community leader network. So in general, you know, we really, Mary and I and Jenny, we felt like we were really just trying to facilitate the research that our partners were doing and the leaders were informing to us, and trying to make sure that we were being true to what they were presenting and sharing. And that was our approach. Next slide. So I'm going to be passing the baton over to Jenny to share the key findings.
Thanks, Dana and Allison, and hi, everybody. I have the task of trying to distill the key findings into a few short minutes, and we hope we'll be able to hear from some of our research participants too. So let's talk about some of the things that we found through the research. First and foremost, I think the process that Dana described really mattered. The sense that often people in communities or working at a community level aren't necessarily asked their views about what is community-led or not, what is community. It's often kind of conceptualized as in other places and brought to places. So that the research process, how people were involved, how they participated, how they were consulted and fed back to, was a really important part of the process. I'm going to hand over to Shuba. So you're going to flip the slide, Alison. Shuba Chacko from the Solidarity Foundation in India to say a word on that front. Shuba.
Thank you so much for having me. And so this research was, we did this through the COVID times, and we were all dealing with a lot of relief and work, and because of the lockdown in India, very, very difficult times. And actually the bright spot of many of those days was this research. So I start with that because it was a sense that we were creating something which was for the future, which was new, which was exciting, and also that many of us were doing it together. So the process involved all of us talking, not only with Global Fund or Dana and others, but also with, talking to people who are located in the different countries and sharing experiences, knowledge, etc. So there was a sense that it was not experts and us, but all of us together were doing it. And I don't just mean us, I also mean people from the ground, the community leaders. So there was a flatter, less hierarchical way of creating knowledge, which for me was a very positive outcome of this research. And there's much more, but I'm sure others will talk about all of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shuba. And I think there's that idea that we were creating deliberately pathways of relationships from the ground up to the regional conversations between different parts of the world, where we, without too many assumptions that we would be finding lots of the same sorts of things. So an open-mindedness and a curiosity as to what we might find along the way. Alison, can you switch the slide? So the another key finding, and if you are steeped in community-led work, you already know this. This is not a project, it's a craft, it's a way of being. It's about the way people engage in a process to do with trust and relationships. And these words came up time and time again, that this was really about processes that created relationships, trust, and facilitated people to be part of their own solutions. Alison, yeah, thanks. Community is in the eye of the beholder. So we were different ideas of what community means really emerged very strongly from this research. Community is a very loaded word, and it's an English word which can be a good thing or it can be a divisive thing. But we really kind of emphasized understanding how people interpreted the word community. And so for some, it was geographic proximity, sharing spaces, kind of issues that they faced in the places they lived. But we were also open to the idea of community as a place of identity. So you might live in a place, but if you're an LGBTQI person, you might find that that is your community. And so the idea that people live in multiple communities, and it's the tension and the movement between different types of community that's really important. And that communities aren't just villages or geographies, but there's communities in terms of the idea of larger ecosystems and actors. So we while without romanticizing the idea of community as a place only of harmony, understanding that it can be a place of contestation, I think we really kind of embrace the idea that community, when it works at its best, is made up of different types and different forces and can be found in different kinds of ways. Next, please. So again, this is probably obvious if you're steeped in this work, that it's less about who and more about how. It's less about saying, are you in or out? Have we got everybody here? But really the processes that allow people to engage, the way that one might set up opportunities for people at the edges to participate, the way that one can start to create a feelings of mutuality and accountability to each other. So again, really emphasizing the processness of this rather than the kind of projectness of it, if you like. I'm going to ask one of our research partners from Russia, Yulia, to speak to that point. Yulia, please.
Yeah, good evening. In Russia, in Moscow is evening now. So yeah, I can add here also that for us, it was very interesting to go deeply to this community process and to understand how the initiatives is growing up and how they become from the idea to implementation. And this question that community-led organization is not about the leader, is more about process, is really for Russia too, because here we have several examples in small cities and small territories, how these small initiatives are growing up, and they become more and more visible, and people are doing something by themselves. For example, we have a small city in the north, and there is a community foundation there, and it is a very small organization. It is about 2 people working there, and of course, all the stuff they are doing there is not only they. It's because they involve a lot of other people, and people themselves involves to to these organizations. And we have this bright example about how even children and parents initiated the skating rink in this small place. So they themselves they came to community foundation, they came to administration, and they themselves decided to organize fundraising events. So parents, they baked pies, and they another Sunday bakery, and the children sell it, and this was the way of fundraising the resources for the rink. And now this rink is there. So, and also they have the hockey club and the hockey team, and this Sunday bakery, parents bakery, is become a new tradition of the place. So it's just a small example how it works in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yulia. I just love that idea that here the community ledness was really the act of doing community-led development was to facilitate others and to find people, to find ways for people to engage and realize that they had resources and they had ideas, and if they could organize them, that was a really kind of important way of realizing their own development, in a sense. We have another quote, Alice, if you want to skip to it, which I think Dana is going to read from another of our research partners, which was Tay with the Nepal Women's Fund.
And they said community-led initiatives are born out of necessity and passion, which focuses on fulfilling the actual need of the community.
Thank you very much. So the next finding number 5. So relationships are the organizing principle, or community-led is also a strategy for organizing, but at the relationships at the heart of it. So if you can build relationships and trusts with people, you can also start to strengthen their sense of their own leadership, their own power. You can start to imbue conversations with a sense of confidence and growth, because there's a sense that actually the starting point is that communities know stuff, they have ideas, they have things they want to explore. And so the sort of facilitation of bringing people together and creating the conditions for them to start to work out what it is they want to do with themselves, how they want to decide, the rules of engagement they want to be part of, with relationships at the center of it, becomes critically important. I think, Julia, you have another story to share on this regard as well, don't you?
Yeah, I also can support this idea about the trust, because this topic, the trust in the community, is become more and more important in Russia, and our community foundations also think about that a lot. So what it means to feel the trust from the community. And yes, another small examples are about also the initiatives, not only from the social groups, but from the experts, for example, who they have the idea. So we talk about the kindergarten and the experts, the teachers who worked with children there. So, and they themselves had the idea, and they become with this idea to community foundation, because they trust them in terms of implementation, and they trust them in terms of support. And it is also very important when we talk not only about the initiative groups and usual people, but we talk about the experts and people who is working and doing something professionally in the community, and they decided to contribute more and doing that with the community-led organization. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. So remember that these conversations took place with members of communities, people working with communities, located within communities, and so it probably comes as no surprise that when you started to actually scratch the surface of and ask people what they thought community-led was, this idea that actually things were community-led when they were able to operate in more equitable ways, inclusive ways, using flat power structures, that for many people who were part of the research process, that this was a kind of a key sign to them that this was really about community-led. It wasn't just a single organization trying to kind of shepherd people into doing things. It was sort of spaces that really created opportunities for people to come together and include them in a more engaged kind of way to be part of processes, including decision processes. And I think that comment around flat power structures, that the flatter your power structures, the more you're able to kind of engage voices, particularly those most marginalized, often at the edges of our societies. Next, please. So again, another kind of resounding agreement across these very, very diverse contexts was that community-led initiatives are more effective because they are able to, because they're not projects per se, but rather the way that people are with each other. They're able to not necessarily race to a timeline. There isn't a deadline by which something has to be done. The way that they kind of unlock local knowledge and local resources, so that the proposition is around people bringing things together. And if people are going to bring their own resources, then they may have a stronger sense of buy-in and how a particular activity might be delivered. The idea of community timelines and what a timeline looks like if it's not a direct A to B, January to December kind of scenario, but actually these, time change is a non-linear process. And so it was processes that accompanied communities in their own according to their own timelines, and also where quality standards were things that were recognized and identified, behaviors, norms agreed by the communities. And this all helps to bring this sense of ownership and co-investment. And for those who are kind of leading those efforts, the activities were the sort of quick wins that allowed people to see, progress being made, but really the process over time of engaging people in their own development was really the sort of larger strategy here at play about building longer term relational capital, strong, resilient kinds of communities. And we're going to hear from Chuk in Vietnam on this particular slide as well. Chuk, over to you, please.
Thank you, Jenny. Good evening, everyone. So these particular characteristics that Jenny just summarized were mentioned again and again by almost all the participants from Vietnam, and I believe from other countries as well. I think it could be best explained by a quick example from a participant, which resonates with all the points that Jenny just made. So a member of an ethnic community, they shared the story that during the first COVID-19 wave in Vietnam, an INGO was trying to produce a health video for this ethnic community. However, the content was very confusing, and as a result, the community did not understand the message they wanted to get across. So these participants and his ethnic minority peers decided to make another video, and that video was warmly received by the community, although it's just the standard was homemade compared to the video that the INGO invested a lot of money to produce. So from the point of the community members, they achieved more with less resources, and it also increased their sense of ownership of the outcome. And like Jenny said, they have all the resources, all the knowledge, and all the things that was needed to produce this kind of product for their own community, and they did it better than outsiders.
Great, thank you so much, Chuk. And I think, Dana, you're going to read some words from Artemisa, our research partner in Mexico with FASOL.
Yeah, Artemisa shared that working hand in hand with the communities, I've learned that everything is about accompanying organizational processes, which are defined from and for the communities themselves. Investing with them in their development processes is a privilege and an honor. We are building a network, a great tribe.
Great, thank you. So the 8th point, the role of funders. I think what this research wasn't about was setting up a kind of local or international inside or outside dynamic alone. It was really to understand what role funders themselves can play in facilitating or in some cases hindering community-led approaches. And I think the idea that the funders can often be quite prescriptive, quite short-term, want to see things that are visible to them, but and maybe because they can't necessarily see other things aren't so visible to them as external actors. So we know, I mean, it can come as no surprise that top-down agendas, short-term project framings, a sense that this is being driven by somebody else outside the community has a need, doesn't help. But the idea of what would it take for, how can funders really be mindful of and respectful of what already exists in a community? And if you think about water falling on dry land, arid land, it doesn't achieve very much. Whereas if you've got things already starting to grow, work out what's already there. So how, external resources or the water in this case, in this metaphor, can actually help build on what's already there. And so maybe it's sometimes around having more of an open conversation, open dialogue, getting to understand what's already there, how what a funder is bringing at least can, at least doesn't undermine what's already there, and at best can build on what already exists. So we're kind of getting the sort of the vertical and the sort of more horizontal forms of accountability. Humility, having money doesn't necessarily bestow wisdom. And so coming with the sense that actually, this narrative around civil society lacking capacity a lot of the time, coming to find out what's already there, and perhaps there are systems and structures that you actually can't see, and understanding that there is a power dynamic, whether you like it or not, out of the best will in the world, that power dynamics are there. And I think just the idea of curiosity and willingness to learn, maybe kind of being able to accompany processes, the idea of patience, that maybe things won't be delivered and packaged quite so nicely, and the idea of recognizing that other kinds of resources and supports are there. You know, the idea of sort of informal leadership, knowledge, things like that. And so again, we've got this slide, the sort of helpful practices and the hurtful practices, and I think those came out really very loud and clear consistently across the different research countries as well. Next, please. And finally, yes, this question of language, which came up time and time again. And obviously our research partners, many of them are not native English speakers. And so we were not just translating terms, we were also translating concepts and really spending time unpacking what a word like community might mean in the kind of international development space, and what it might look like, or are there proxies for those kinds of words? It is our civil society organizations, community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, using language to try and trade with external actors. You say community, I say community, we must be talking about the same thing. And so really to give ourselves some time to sort of interrogate the language, to sort of take it apart so that we could put it together again. And I think this quote from Artemisa saying, actually, part of this process was to give language to ideas that we've known for a long time, and to do it with peers and allies. So the language that people were using was serving the research that they were doing, rather than trying to kind of squeeze into boxes or categories that already exist out there. So those are our top findings from the research, and obviously you can dive into that, and we very much hope that you'll dive into the longer report at some point too, because it's very rich. It was a very rich and extensive and fascinating process. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to Dana to talk about the community-led self-assessment tool, which I think if you've registered for this webinar, you'll also been asked to take a look at too. So Dana, over to you.
Thanks, Jetty. So one of the outputs that we provided as part of this research was some sort of tool to help organizations that wanted to understand community-led to be more community-led. And the way we got to that tool was it was very qualitative at first. We did a content analysis based on the field reports. Through that, we found 59 characteristics that were identifying community-ledness. And we could see across countries which of these were kind of common among participants across countries, and which were maybe more context-based. But what we couldn't tell was how important each of these characteristics was. So we decided to do a survey together. And we sent the survey out to the community leaders. And in some cases, the field partners completed them on their behalf. And then we also asked others working in related contexts in other regions to also fill out the survey. And for those of you that filled out the survey after you registered, it looked something very similar to what you completed. And that helped us to identify kind of what seems more universal and kind of important across contexts, and what may be more context specific. So the tool divides between these 9 kind of more essential, perhaps more universal contexts. And then on the next slide, you'll see 17 other characteristics that were also important, but perhaps might be essential in some contexts, but not in others. So the tool, when you look at it, we have everybody look at the 9, next slide, Allison, if you have a chance, thanks. We have everybody look at the 9 essential characteristics and self-assess based on that. And then for the 17, they choose which of these 5, which 5 out of these 17 are important in your context. And then after they complete both of those self-assessments, they would have an open-ended field to kind of talk a little bit about, to process that. And we asked them to talk about how they define their community, what kind of issues of power and conflict are present in their communities, and how do they respond to that. And there's a final page that's more just it's a worksheet to think through, what can you be doing right now to be more community-led, or what would you like to do if you had some support or additional assistance to do so. So that's just a brief look at the tool. And then, in terms of interpretation of the tool, we, after the testing, we kind of found that, just here you'll see the 9 essential features, and we place them where they fit. Are you working with your beneficiaries like you're working for the community, or is your initiative partnered with the community, or are you actually, is your organization and group led by the community itself? And so where do these features and factors come in, and how could you become stronger within each one?
Thank you so much, Dana. So the question then becomes, what's next with this research? And as you've seen and we just mentioned, we are still asking for more input on the survey to help narrow down those 9 and 17 characteristics. If you didn't take the survey before attending the webinar, we would love for you to do it. I shared the link as a 10-minute survey. So we're going to continue honing the tools. And then we're going to begin conducting user research with potential users, the folks that might be using this tool in other parts of the world, to understand the formats that might be useful for you. How would you like to use this self-assessment, and how can it be easier for you? Do you want it online? Do you want it on paper? All of those types of questions. And we would love to get your feedback on that. We also then will be revising the tools and making them publicly available, and then continuing the conversations with and among funders and community-led organizations to help bridge that language gap between, you know, what funders are talking about and asking for, and what communities are talking about and asking for. I'm going to skip. We're a little short on time, so we're going to actually skip.
This exercise was very different from everything else we've ever.
We're going to skip. Barbara was going to share a couple minutes on the video, but we're running short on time. So what I'm going to do now is invite you to get into our breakout groups. We have about 20 minutes where we're going to break out and invite you to share what you learned, what stood out to you, what you think might be missing from the work that's been done so far, and then most importantly, what you want Global Giving to do next and where to take it from here. Welcome back. I hope you had a good conversation. I know the group I was in had a really great conversation. And so we have just about 9 minutes here. I'm going to invite some of the leaders from the hosts from the breakout rooms to share some of the themes that you heard coming through. Miranda, would you actually jump in first with the themes that we came up with? Oh, Miranda may not be back yet.
Oh,
is there another Global Giving? Oh, there's Miranda.
Sorry.
I'll repeat the question.
What was the question?
Would you be willing to share the themes that the group that you were hosting came up with?
Yeah, so we, as far as like next steps or sort of. Sure. Yeah, so we had a good group that sort of settled on 3 main themes. One is wanting to test the tool out with their organization and their community to see how these questions resonate with their community and how they understand them. The second is acknowledging that into the local language of their community.
Se volvió loco.
The third is
we're okay now.
The third is wanting to share the full report with some of their funders, to get some of their funders and maybe larger donors to think about the themes presented in this report.
Thank you, Miranda. Sorry to put you on the spot there. Is there another group that wants to share the themes that they came up with?
I can share. So this is Ellie. We had a great conversation, but nowhere near enough time. And so our key themes were what really stood out was sort of the importance of trust, and how do you how do you generate trust on sort of in all the different types of relationships that you do have, and whether it's sort of like trust with your community, or trust with your funding community, or sort of trust between your donor community and your and the direct community you're serving. There was also a recognition that sort of like some how do we actually, what are sort of, some strategies for improving our community ledness, or sort of to actually build that trust, or to get to be more community led, and how does that happen? And some encouragement for continuing our collective learning together, to continue to come together as a community and learn together. So those are just a handful of the themes that came out. A good discussion and nowhere near enough time.
Thank you, Ellie. Any representative from another group want to share?
I can go ahead and go.
Ooh, go ahead,
Paige. Megan, all you.
Okay, I'm going to go very fast. Well, we didn't have enough time, but we were very happy to be together. A lot of people appreciated the research, and the first thing that really came up was funders need to be bought in. Like, the research is great, but like, how do we move to getting funders bought in, whether it's like more global giving buy-in as a funder as well, but also speaking to other funders about really investing in community-led development and not being patronizing. That was one of the words that was used, and I think that's really important. We also talked a lot about how community-led development is a craft, not a project, and I think that resonated with a lot of people, the processness of it and really investing in relationships. And then again, we got back to what's our shared language between funders and community leaders so that we can actually talk about this in a way that is meaningful for the people doing the work, as well as like what are the interrelationships between perhaps like the US and UK fundraising arms and the people doing the work in country, and how do you talk about that in a way that makes sense and is like really kind of speaks to whatever situation or context that your organization is in. Paige, all you.
Wonderful. We also didn't have enough time, but it was great to learn more about some of the work that our team is doing. I think the 3 takeaways that I will bring up, the first one that we talked about with resonating was the talking to communities. The partners that we had in our room talked a lot about how important that is, whether in the fact that they're doing it in their work already in a lot of ways. In particular, that most international groups don't do that necessarily automatically, this kind of talking to the community before getting started, and the importance of language and trust within those conversations. A big question that came up was this, similar to echoing what others have said here, how do we connect this with institutional funding, with grant making, not just individual fundraising? And there was a general feeling that a lot of the work that's being done in this global giving community already aligns with many of these community-led principles and practices. So kind of understanding what happens next, how do we take this to the next funding opportunity level.
Thank you, Paige. Maybe one more?
I can go, Alison, if there's time.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So there was a lot of similar themes to what I've heard from other people. There was a lot of excitement about how this kind of validates what they've already been thinking, and it puts it into words, and it gives them a bit more, I guess, support on a global level that they should move forward with this community-led approaches. And one thing in terms of next steps, similar to everyone else, is how to kind of make this tangible and how to put this into practice. And one thing that perhaps that came out of the session was maybe using the presentation, the report, and the research, and kind of molding it into different ways to communicate to different audiences. So really addressing the challenges, because there's an idea that maybe we're preaching to the choir, the way we've, who we're giving it to, like they're already kind of on board. So how do we make sure we change the content in a way that's, I guess, the way it's phrased, through the language or through the focus, to make sure it really addresses the priorities of the people who could potentially give funding, or make it more relatable to those who might be harder to convince. So that was a really interesting point that came out.
Thank you, Ida. Okay, I'm going to give the last 2 words here to our research partners. So first, we're going to hear from Barbara, who wasn't able to be here. So this is from a presentation that she gave to us earlier. So here you go.
This exercise was very different from everything else we've ever done, because the criteria that have been set up here, they're different from the usual due diligence box ticking exercises we are so much used to in the NGO world. So I think it would be good if this is not looked at as a rigid framework, but rather as a tool to pick out potential weaknesses or potential areas for improve. Basically, it tells you something about the soul of the organization or the backbone of an organization. It gives you an understanding of the principles, the fundamental beliefs, whether the organization is organized bottom up, whether they are democratically organized, or what are their fundamental beliefs. And this is so different from all the other frameworks I've seen, because it really takes you into different dimensions. And I think the assessment tool can help funders to understand the current context of the organizational state, or the stage of development the organization is in at this point in time. But it it could be, oh, if it is thought, if the funder thinks all those criteria are kind of, the organization is thinking about certain criteria, but they might not be there yet, but there is potential. This could be a good starting point for building a relationship, a longer term or long-term relationship, but they should not be used as a rigid framework.
All right, and then my last person I want to call on is Truk. I wanted to see if you had your last thought about how it should be used.
Yeah, actually, this suggestion came from the participants of the research after testing the self-assessment. Some of them said that they would consider including the output of the assessment into their organizational profile and use them as communication materials to share with their donors and their partners about their organization. So it suggests that the tool could serve beyond the purpose of just assessing the organization and add more value to the organizations taking it.
Thank you so much, Truk. All right, we are out of time. We could talk about this for hours with all of you, and I hope that you will continue to engage with us. I will be sending out an email by the end of the week with a short survey asking you how you'd like to be involved, if you'd like to be part of a cohort that tests this. So thank you for all of your time. Thank you for all of our research partners and presenters. I'm so appreciative of all of your attention, and let's stay in touch on this. Have a great evening, rest of the day, everyone.